Okay, so hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Default Global. This is where we connect with global first entrepreneurs and remote work experts from all around the world to share their experiences and knowledge. Our guest today is Tammy Bjelland, founder and CEO at Workplaceless. Tammy, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Tammy, you have a remarkable story starting your remote journey in 2011, right? And then founding Workplaceless in 2017. So, with that, could you please introduce yourself and to our listeners and share how your experience have shaped your perspective on remote work?
Absolutely. Yeah, so I started my remote work journey in 2011. I had previously been in academia and moved
Okay.
back to the US from Spain and was looking for a remote job because I didn't want my job to dictate where I lived. So I wanted to choose where I lived and then, get a job doing what I loved. And so I
Okay.
found something in ed tech and it was a great role. I loved it. I loved working in ed tech and I loved working remotely. And then I was hooked. So I determined that I was not going to report into an office and work a 9 to 5 job. And so I worked remotely in different positions and for different
Mm-hmm.
companies, primarily in ed tech, and then expanded into corporate training.
Mm-hmm.
And in 2017, I founded Workplaceless because as a remote worker and a manager, I found it very challenging to find professional development opportunities that were relevant to the remote work context. So when I was looking for leadership training, for instance, it was very much based on office based principles. So, making sure you have face to face time, making
Mm-hmm.
sure you make yourself seen at the office, and that wasn't relevant to me and it wasn't relevant to my goals when it came to advancing in my career and maintaining flexibility as a key part of my life.
Mm-hmm.
So I founded Workplaceless to help others develop the skills to succeed in remote work and also to help companies be successful in enabling success in their remote employees and managers.
Mm-hmm. Okay, sounds good. Sounds good. And basically, let's chat about the future. With your experience, you're the right person to talk about this. So, as a co-founder of myself, as a co-founder of a global talent acquisition company, I've been, chatting with many founders, executives, and I'm noticing a curious trend, a kind of split in the remote work scene, right? So some companies are shifting back to office life, right? While others only just beginning to hire from beyond the US, for example, right? So, and what's interesting is how the motivation for going remote, kind of changed a bit, right? So previously, the main driver seemed to be talent shortage, right? But now it looks like this cost reduction has become the primary motivation for adopting global hiring and even remote work strategy, remote work policy, right? So, with that in mind, you know a lot about remote work, right? So you're the expert in this space, and I'm just curious, what do you think will happen next with remote work and global hiring? Maybe you can tell us, like, in 5 years perspective, how do you see this? How do you see this industry?
So I see in 5 years flexibility being a little bit simpler and more
Hmm.
complicated. So
Okay.
simpler in that it's going to be the default, right?
Hmm.
So I think we're going to see employees expect to see some sort of flexibility
Okay.
offered by employers. So that in on one side, it's going to be simpler because everyone's going to expect some level of flexibility. I
Hmm.
also see that it's going to be more complicated. So
Hmm.
as, you know, industry goes much faster than like the law, right? So
Okay.
what I'm seeing is that there's going to be
Some
laws.
regulation, right?
Yeah, those regulations are going to
Okay.
change and adapt, but they're not going to change as quickly as the hiring landscape.
Hmm.
So I think that there's a possibility, and I can't see the future for sure, but my prediction is that it's going to become more complicated.
Okay.
I don't think that that is going to keep employers, and it won't keep employees for sure from desiring flexibility. What
Hmm.
I think that creates is this opportunity for partners to come into that landscape and serve to mitigate some of that complexity for
Hmm.
employers and employees to access flexibility. So I think it's
Hmm.
gonna be simpler and also more complicated.
Okay, okay. And talking about that flexibility, right? So I know you talked a lot about it, and in one of your interviews, I guess, or some article it was, you mentioned that companies they're losing their best workers if they're not flexible enough, right? So
Yeah.
can we go a bit deeper? Can you tell us more about what you mean by flexibility? And do you think workers can still ask for this even with the economy being tough right now?
So, great question. I divide flexibility into four key categories. There's location flexibility, so that ability to work where you want,
Okay.
whether it's from home or in a co working facility or in the office. Then you have schedule flexibility. So, do you have to work 9 to 5, Monday through Friday
Hmm.
on the East Coast of the USA? Or can you have a nonlinear work day? Can you have a condensed work week? Or do you have a completely, you know, work whenever policy where it doesn't matter how many hours you work or when you work as long as you get your work done?
Hmm.
And then there's job flexibility and PTO flexibility. But the primary types of flexibility that we talk about when we talk about a global
Hmm.
workforce is location and schedule
Right.
flexibility. And I absolutely do think that employees can ask for flexibility in this job market because even though the news might tell you one thing that there's, all these layoffs happening in tech, the reality is that there is a shortage of talent. And
Hmm.
it is, it's across industries, and right now we have one sector that is seeing, a change or a shift in demand and supply. But overall, we still are seeing a gap when it comes to companies just needing talent. They need talent. And especially when you think about companies that are not huge companies, they're not able to offer like a huge amount of benefits.
Hmm.
Flexibility is going to be one of those things that employers that are smaller are still able to offer. So I absolutely do think that employees can and should continue to demand flexibility, because that is what will keep employers, um, you know, hungry
Hmm.
to make those shifts to adapt to new ways of working.
Hmm. Okay. Okay. And if we still have this talent shortage, right? How can organizations effectively attract and retain top talent when we're talking about remote employees specifically, right? Or global employees? Do you have any tips or recommendations?
Yes. So this is really interesting because I just attended a local conference, and part of the one of the questions that was asked was, "How can this small city attract the remote
Hmm.
tech worker?"
Okay.
Right? And how can smaller companies that can't offer those, really large benefits packages, how can you attract remote workers? And for companies that are, they're struggling to attract top talent, they definitely need to um, highlight the flexibility that they do offer,
Hmm.
as well as what they're doing to make sure that employees are successful in that remote environment. So,
Hmm.
providing training and providing career development opportunities that are designed specifically for the flexible work environment. So, 76% of employees are more likely to stay with an employer if they can offer continuing training opportunities,
Hmm.
and that is one area that I don't think nearly enough employers think about when it comes to attracting and retaining talent is, what opportunities are you providing those employees to learn and grow in that company? And then what rewards do they have for learning and growing? Like, can they actually envision themselves in different positions in that company? And that's where so many startups and younger companies really fall short, is this lack of planning and lack of
Hmm.
vision setting when it comes to the future and how employees can put themselves in that future vision for the organization. And so any company that's struggling to, attract and retain talent, I would strongly encourage them to think about incorporating flexible first and flexible um, you know training programs and
Hmm.
career development paths and opportunities that are specific to flexible work.
Hmm. Okay. Okay. Sounds good. Another topic that you talk a lot, in fact, it's is rituals, right? So rituals for remote teams specifically,
Mhm.
right? And it's something that I totally get because I have teams in 10 different countries, and for instance, we have bunch of different rituals in our company. For example, the one that I really love and suggest you know to everyone basically,
Mhm.
we have a day every 2 months where we update our guides, our internal documents. It stops them getting out of date, which can
Mhm.
really, slow you down when you're working remotely, right? So, with that in mind, could you give some maybe examples from your side of useful rituals that people in companies that are working remotely, right, might implement?
Mhm. Yeah, you make such a great point about those rituals, and I think especially in a distributed team, it's very important to make sure that you have intentionally thought of those rituals to
Hmm.
achieve the goals you want. So one of the biggest challenges in remote work is feeling connected to one
Right.
another, feeling connected to the vision and the mission of the organization. So with that in mind, implement rituals that can enable those connections. So,
Hmm.
one example of a ritual that we had in our team, we created a Slack bot that suggested games. And so we would play asynchronous games with one another.
Okay.
And so that intent was to have fun, number one. So we
Hmm.
wanted to be able to have fun, but not require everyone to do it. And we wanted to have an opportunity for people to connect with one another, in a context that was not related to work at all. And then another example is a skills sharing session. So
Hmm.
having, once a month or once a quarter, have teams break up into groups and have experts, designated experts within those teams, share some of the skills that they've been working on or share something that they've accomplished. And that really makes contributions visible. And it also allows team members to see one another in a different light. And you're also elevating that learning mindset within the
Hmm.
team. So, having another ritual is just something that I think we all do sort of naturally, we sort of want naturally, and that's sending updates.
Okay.
At Workplaceless, we really prioritize async first communication. So the ritual is sending daily updates asynchronously, where you
Hmm.
identify, top three priorities and blockers, and then. If you want to add something good or something that you're looking forward to for the day, that allows people to see, what else is going on in your day.
Hmm.
So incorporating your values and your goals into the rituals, I think is a way to make sure that your team can connect
Okay.
the time that it takes to participate in that ritual with the value of it.
Hmm.
Because I think where some teams get a little off track is trying to add just, virtual happy hours and all these things just with the very um, ambiguous goal of, oh, we need to offer time to connect, but it's not completely obvious to the people participating how that particular ritual ties to what the company values.
Hmm.
So I think just being thoughtful and intentional about incorporating those rituals will make employees more likely to participate and enjoy them.
Okay. Okay, and you touched this regarding asynchronous communication, right? Sometimes it might be super tough, because of all those different channels that we have that we use, like, right? So, and you talked about this concept of communication charter, right?
Yes.
Can you explain how this communication charter works and how it can help teams establish clear uh, guidelines, right, for using different communication channels for different purposes, I suppose.
Sure. Yeah. A communication charter is a team agreement that documents and makes universal the expectations for communicating
Hmm.
using the tools that you have. So it defines the priority levels. So,
Hmm.
you can define them however you want in your team, but usually you would see some sort of urgent category, high, normal, low.
Hmm.
And it's just one of those things that you sort of assume that people know, or it just is the same across the board. But until you actually articulate those expectations, it's just an assumption. And so you
Yeah.
really do have to define what constitutes an urgent message. And then after you define what that means, you have to define what the expectation is for the speed of response. So if
Hmm.
something is urgent, that is the time when you would expect an immediate response or within the next 10 minutes, right? So you would have to define that within your team. But as we've adopted so many channels and and especially in remote work, we tend to be over responsive, or we want to be seen as hyper responsive because there are so few opportunities for us to make our contributions visible.
Hmm.
So we tend to just like respond as quickly as possible. And then we just feel like there's so much communication happening and you just feel like you always have to be on. Um,
Hmm.
Creating a communication charter really puts that in check
Okay.
because you're separating what really needs to be responded to immediately from other information that doesn't require an immediate response.
Hmm.
So you have the priority levels, then you have the types of messages. So, communication from a client, for
Hmm.
instance, if a client can't access their account, for instance, that's a
Right.
higher priority than, this is an update from, the product team from last week, right?
Hmm.
Which it would require, response from a
Yeah.
longer time period. So defining the types of messages and then finally, choosing which communication channels are appropriate for which message and
Hmm.
which priority level. So on
Hmm.
our team, for instance, Slack is the default communication method. So you would not send an urgent message by email, right?
Hmm.
You would send it by Slack. And for our team, you tag it urgent. So that way somebody knows that it is an urgent message, needs to be responded to immediately. So that really helps minimize like this communication overload, because as we add more tools to our stack, it's very likely we're getting some like duplicative
Yeah.
messaging going through, right? The same message goes through your project management tool and Slack and email, and the communication charter is designed to help prevent that, and also just make sure that people have a universal understanding of what the expectations for communication
Hmm.
are. So you don't have those like a manager is waiting for a response back from a direct report for 3 days and gets annoyed or gets upset about it. But if it's according to the expectations set in the communication charter, that indicates that those expectations either need to be adjusted or, um, specified further in the request. So it really does help, especially in a global team. It
Hmm.
helps identify what everyone's expectations are and then just provides alignment, so there's no confusion.
Yeah, that's a very good tip. Thank you. Um, let's go back a bit and talk about global hiring, right? So, in your experience working with various companies, organizations, from your perspective, what are some of the key criteria or qualities you should look for when hiring globally?
Yeah. So when hiring globally in a distributed team, I would look for primarily mindset. You
Hmm.
know, do they have a learning and growth mindset? Do
Hmm.
they believe or do they have aligned values with this idea of global flexible work? Right.
Hmm.
So not everyone is going to want to work remotely.
Right.
And I don't necessarily believe that it's our job to convince somebody who doesn't want to work remotely that they should, right?
Hmm.
Um, when there are so many people who do want to work remotely.
Right.
So I think the first thing is, is an alignment of values or understanding that of the benefits that remote work brings. Then, mindset, learning and growth, a placeless mindset. So do they value location independence over physical presence? And there are a couple more things that I would look for specifically there. Um, and then are they problem solving? Number
Hmm.
one. So how do they typically solve a problem, or if they
Hmm.
encounter a challenge, do they always go to um, a person first, or do they exhaust the resources that are available to them first as they solve the problem, and then they go to a human resource?
Yeah.
Um, uh, some of these things, are trainable. I would say that
Hmm.
almost everything is trainable. But when it comes to, hiring and seeing who would be a good fit in a global team, definitely look at mindset, look at problem solving and what their instincts are there. And then also workflow design. So the best remote and hybrid workers are very good at thinking through how to design a workflow and how to
Hmm.
optimize synchronous and asynchronous components. It's not just about, oh, we need to solve this problem, let's get on a meeting, right? The best remote workers are thinking really strategically about how to best use people's time and how to optimize all the outcomes. So if you are brainstorming, for instance, what's the best way to get the best ideas? And it's very likely not going to be getting everybody into a Zoom meeting for 2 hours and just throwing ideas on a virtual whiteboard, right? You have to really think about how you develop that overall process to achieve that end outcome. And I don't think that is highlighted enough, this ability to design a workflow from start to finish to achieve a desired outcome in a distributed environment. So those are some of the things that, in my experience, people who are really good at working in global teams,
Hmm.
they're able to do that. And then the final thing is virtual presence. So when you are able to meet with someone virtually,
Yeah.
how do you make them feel? Right. So when
Hmm.
you come to a virtual meeting and you're taking up somebody's valuable synchronous time. Are you prepared? Are you present? Are you multitasking? I mean, we're all multitasking at some point, but do you make the people that you're in that virtual room with, do you make them feel as if you are actually there
Hmm.
versus, this is just something that I'm going to check off my to-do list today.
Yeah.
And those are some things that, there are so many other things that can be trained. Um, and these are some of the qualities that, if they have had remote work experience before, if they've gone through some of the trainings that we have, for instance, and they've developed these abilities to, show up and be present, and then also optimize their synchronous and asynchronous time. Those are going to be team members that are able to jump in and succeed in a remote global team.
Okay, perfect. And basically, generally speaking, and probably that will be my last question for today. What are the three key pieces of advice you would give to founders, executives who are just starting their switch toward global hiring, remote work policy? Maybe you have some tips.
My first piece of advice is to adopt an async first approach. As you add to your global team, you are likely adding time zones to to the the globe that you're hiring from. So adopting an async first approach is going to enable you to actually achieve the results that you want, without requiring people to join in meetings at 2 a.m. their local time. So make sure that you are not just tapping into a global talent pool, but you're enabling them to succeed. And the way to do that is to enable async first practices in your organization. And that starts with you. So founders and executive leaders can sometimes struggle with async first, because there's a lot of fear of missing out. They want to be in the meeting, they want to have everyone in the meetings. And so it really is a big shift in mindset. And so that's something that I would invite founders to explore. What's their role in enabling a global team's success? And what are they doing right now that might be hindering the success of their global teams?
Okay, perfect. So, I guess then we're good. Thanks a lot, Tommy, for sharing your insights on global hiring, remote work trends, on rituals that are essential for any remote team from my perspective as well. For sharing these challenges and obstacles of remote work and global hiring. So, we wish you and Workplaceless all the best in your journey. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.